Everybody, my name is Ignacio Fuentes. I'm a sales engineer with Progress and with Telerik. I cover the .NET products. In particular, today we're going to talk about ASP.NET MVC. As you probably already know, the topic at hand is structuring maintainable JavaScript code within ASP.NET MVC applications. So the reason why we wanted to do this is because, of course, we understand that a lot of people are now using JavaScript heavy frameworks like Angular and React and Vue and things like that. But if you're building a regular ASP.NET MVC application that is not going to be relying on those heavy client-side frameworks, it's still the reality that you're going to have to write some JavaScript code. And you can get started adding JavaScript code in a way that you're essentially just sprinkling it. But it might be a good idea to, even though you're not relying on a heavy framework, you probably want to structure it in a way that is going to be comprehensive, maintainable, and predictable in the way that the JavaScript is going to execute. So with that, I'm actually going to go straight into Visual Studio, and let's get started with I'm going to demonstrate a couple of approaches on how this could be achieved, and we'll go from not very good to a little bit more organized, if you will. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to add a completely new application. This is going to be an ASP.NET web application. It could very well be, by the way, an ASP.NET Core web application, as long as it's a regular MVC application that's relying on the Razor view engine and relying on the typical MVC architecture. And again, this would not apply if you're using a client-side framework like Angular and React. The purpose is for regular ASP.NET MVC applications that utilize fully the MVC framework. So just going to pick a regular MVC application, leave it at that. We are not starting from the Telerik template. We're going to add that as we go along. So, I want to get started just discussing MVC patterns on their own without relying on Telerik at all. And then we'll take a look at some of the Razor-based Kendo UI components for MVC. So one thing that I want to do before we even start is I know that there is a little bit of an issue with one of the NuGet packages that is there out of the box, and that is Newtonsoft.json. It's got nothing to do with what we're covering today, but we do want to update it because otherwise the application essentially does not work out of the box. So just update Newtonsoft.json. This might be an issue with the latest version of Visual Studio or the latest version of the templates. Not entirely sure what it is, but just updating that package actually seems to fix the problem that I was having before. So I'm going to just go ahead and update the JSON.NET package. And let's go ahead and see what we have from the very beginning. It's going to start the typical MVC application that should have a little bit of something that we can work with. All right, so we can see it's a very clean application with 3 items right here at this bar at the bottom. It's got 3 pages right here. So the question is, what if you want to start adding some JavaScript integrations here, some JavaScript kind of manipulation of things, or something that you want to do, potentially with jQuery, etc. So let's go ahead and stop this. If we take a look at the code, the first thing that you want to see is how is the layout even being produced. So out of the box, what we get is a couple of things. We noticed that Microsoft adds to their template, they add this modernizer JavaScript library. I don't think that we need it, but we're just going to leave it there for now. Then what they do is they add jQuery at the bottom, they have Bootstrap at the bottom, and then they have this thing called the render section scripts. And we're going to take a look at that. But the point is that what if we want to add some code, whatever that code, to this index page, right? We want to execute some JavaScript on this page. One way that we can do it, of course, is to essentially open and close a script tag right here. And let's say that we want to alert hello world, right? Just play that again. And we get an alert. Now, if we notice what we see on the screen, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. we have, this is the complete HTML page that you get, that is a composition of the layout and the index CSHTML page. So we notice that at some point right here, we get that script just in the middle of the markup. In fact, it's even before the footer, and it's just whatever the page is. And that's because the way that the layout works, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger as well, actually. The way that the layout works is that there's a section called the render body. So whatever happens to be on the page that's being rendered by the MVC framework, that's gonna get put right here. So even the script that we're writing at the very bottom of the page, or we can actually write it, let's say we put it at the top of this page, right? A script itself does not, render any visual. So it still should work. We still get the alert, but now if we look at the rendered markup, we see that the script is at the top. So evidently this is not ideal because we don't want it either at the top or in the middle of the HTML markup. We probably want our scripts to be somewhere at the bottom of the page before the closing body tag, of course. This is going to give us better performance. It's going to give us, a place where we can look for the scripts. So it's better for the developer and it's better for the machine as well because it's going to run faster. So how can we possibly add that code that we just wrote to the bottom of the page? So one way to do it is to make use of that function that we saw before. This is a feature called the section, the render section of the layout. Essentially, it allows us to, within our views, define things that belong to this section right here. So instead of relying on the render body, we're going to be using the section. In this case, it's a section called the scripts. It could be called whatever, but Microsoft decided to name it scripts, and that makes sense. So that essentially means that no matter where you wrote that piece of code in your view, as long as you wrap it inside of the section scripts, because that's the name of it, just doing that. So again, no matter where I put it in this file, since it's wrapped inside of sections, that means it won't get put as part of the render body. So it will not belong to the body at all. It will belong to the section that's right here at the bottom. So we can run the page again. It should still work. That's the first thing that we care about, is that the code that I wrote still functions, of course, but now it is at the right spot. And that spot is, now it's at the bottom of the page. So that is one way to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Of course, that can get a lot more complex. So for instance, let's say that we do actually need the Telerik components, right? So how is that going to work? Because the Telerik components, as we know, in the case of the MVC components, they produce their own JavaScript code. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. Let's use this wizard that basically configures my project to use the MVC components. Let's pick one of those themes. Maybe the Bootstrap theme is good. Leave that as it is. And this is going to do a couple of things. It's going to add the DLL to the project so that I have now Kendo as one of the references. But it's also going to modify my layout. And this is, I'll say it's almost perfect, but in fact, there's a little bit of a wrinkle here, and that is the Kendo MVC components require jQuery, but it turns out that the layout that I'm using and the template that I'm using already has jQuery. So we probably don't want two versions of jQuery at the same time, or even if it's the same version, we don't want two references to jQuery on the page. So we can leave the one that Microsoft added initially and take out the one that the wizard just added, and things should still function. Now, the one thing that we don't like is that before we had all that stuff, really at the bottom of the page, all the scripts, and as I mentioned before, we probably want to keep them at the bottom of the page, but so far, this only added the Kendo components and the MVC components, so it should still work. So let's go ahead and first of all try it, make sure that it still is functioning correctly. But we want to you know, follow the architecture that we're trying to follow. So for now, let's do something simple. Let's add a Kendo button. We can do that on this page right here. So to add a Kendo button, I'm going to go ahead and go straight to the documentation. Let's find the button, maybe. All right, and that primary button looks good. Let's just copy and paste that code. And we can use it for this one, for instance, this learn more button that we have right here. Just replace it with the Kendo button. So just by doing that, we now should have a Kendo button on the page. But the question is the JavaScript as we want it? And I'm going to take out that alert box from the, maybe just do console.log. From the index page. All right. So what do we have? Now we have a page that is still logging that. We should have from the index page as a log, and we should have a Kendo button. But what happened to the JavaScript? Where is the JavaScript, in fact? So the Kendo button and any Kendo widget will always do two things. It will produce markup, and in this case, we see it right here, probably a little bit small. Here we go. It produces markup, HTML markup for the widget. In this case, it's a button, but it also produces script, and it puts it right there, inline script that, you know, it works, it functions. But if we want to get a good handle of all of our JavaScript, we probably don't want it there. So there's another feature now that we can make use, and this is a feature of the Telerik MVC widgets, and that is called the deferred initialization. So this allows me to tell the Telerik components to not worry about the JavaScript for now, only produce the markup, and then the JavaScript you can put it some other time. That's why it's deferred. So a good place to put that, of course, would be in the layout. We can come in here and say that, you know, render section scripts, that's all good, but we actually need the Kendo JavaScript to be output right here. So that's the deferred scripts. And if we take a look at the code now, again, everything should still work as we expect it to work. Oops. So we still have the button, but now if we take a look at the output, we can see that the button is now only markup right here. And the actual JavaScript code is at the bottom of the page. So this is good. I mean, this is one way to do things. We can obviously go, let's say that we go now to the, maybe the about page, and we're gonna also add a button there. Just copy and paste that. We put another button right there. So we're also using the deferred initialization here, but now we don't need to worry about it all. You know, the JavaScript. We know that nothing here will produce any kind of JavaScript. It will only happen at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the layout page, in fact. And that is on the about page. So let's go there. The about page should now also have a button, right? And we see at the button, we have that right here. So of course, at this point, we only have the JavaScript that's relevant to this page. And the one thing that might be a concern here is that, you know, what if we do want some code that should be executed on every page, but some code only to be executed on the about page and only some code to be executed on the index page. And this is where it can get a little bit more complicated to set up. Now, one thing that we have as an advantage at this point is that we can now move all of this JavaScript code to the bottom of the page where we actually want it, because we now know that everything is being rendered at the bottom right here. If we weren't using this deferred scripts, for instance, let's assume that we go back to this about page and we take out this deferred, it's going to try to generate the button, but the problem is going to be that now, if we look at the code, Kendo is not defined, and the reason for that is that if we look at the code, it is trying to use Kendo right here, but Kendo hasn't even been added to the page. Kendo is right here at the bottom. So this is why you want to use the deferred initialization, especially when you are trying to make sure that all of your scripts are at the bottom of the page. Because as we can see now, everything is, this is just CSS, no scripts, except Modernizer, which, like I said, is not really required. We can probably move that to the bottom as well, but it's not, it's not the topic at hand. So let's fix that again. Put that back. Now, one thing is that, it works. It gives you one way to do things, but it's not really an architecture that you can follow. Because like I said, what about the code that you want on different pages? What if you want a little bit more control over what gets executed and how and when? So there are a few approaches that we can take. The idea would be that you have a good handle, not really a full-on framework. So there are a couple of approaches out there. One is called the, this was in a way invented, I guess, it was proposed by Paul Irish. Yeah, I believe he works at Google now in the Chrome team. And this is a markup-based, unobstructive, comprehensive DOM-ready execution. Essentially meaning that, there's got to be a way to structure your code so that, for instance, especially because we're on an MVC application, we know that there's always going to be a controller, and we know that there's always going to be an action that corresponds to the view that we are looking at. So this is called the Garber-Irish implementation, and we can put it right here just to take a look at it. So it requires a couple of things. It requires that on the body, we modify that body so that it's got two data dash attributes. One is the controller, and the other one is the action. So we can copy that, put it in our application. We can see currently we don't have anything. What we want to do is add a couple of properties right here. Oops, where did I go? Here it is. So the only thing that this is going to do, it's going to add a data dash controller that should map to, for instance, home, and data dash action that should map to, for instance, index, right? So if I load the page again, everything as usual still works. If we look at the code, there should not be any errors or anything like that, but the actual markup has a little bit of a difference now. The markup has information about what controller in the MVC application you're on and what action you're on. Remember, this doesn't necessarily need to match with the URL. In fact, if we go to a different URL, just a home URL, for instance, as this one, it still knows that it's the home controller, and it still knows that it's the index action, essentially because it's got nothing to do with the URL. It is very much a feature of the MVC framework. So we're passing down to the view the information of what is the controller and what is the action. And with this information, we can have some clever JavaScript architecture to execute code per action per controller. So, and that is what I was looking at before. Where did I put it? Did I close it? Here we go. So this is the Garber-Irish implementation. So now I can copy this file, and you can think about it as, it's not really a framework, but it's a proposed architecture that you can follow. So it's just a garber-irish.js file, and we'll look at it in more detail in a second. For now, let's just add it to the application. So scripts, add new JavaScript file. Let's call it Garber-Irish. It doesn't have to be called that. Doesn't really matter. And paste that right there. So what does it do? First of all, upon the document ready, we want to execute a specific function called the util.init. And the util.init is this one right here. And what it does is, first of all, it grabs the controller name from the body that we just put, the data dash attribute, the data dash controller in particular, and grabs the action. So based on that, it goes in and executes the controller and action function that maps to that name. So for instance, we have this home init function right here, which is going to be controller wide, and we have this index action that is action specific. So for instance, we can write console.log hello from the index action. And this is code that it's only going to execute on the index action. And we can do the same for the about, for instance, right? I can create a function right here. Oop. Here we go. And let's do console.log hello from the about action. So now we have a little bit more of a tight control over what gets executed, how, and where. It's not just random JavaScript code splattered onto the page. There is a place where you know you can look for to understand what code is being executed at the right time. What I need to do, of course, is add that to our application. So right here, scripts, Garber Irish, just throw it right there. And let's see what happens. Got a lot of this. Clean it up a bit. Let's look at our console. And we have hello from the index page and hello from the index action. So this one is coming from that render sections that we were looking at before. And in fact, I don't believe that we need that at all anymore. We can take that out. We don't need it. It is easier and more maintainable to not even rely on that. Take it out altogether. Reload the page. So it's hello from the index action. And we can get more specific than that, of course. We can go and say, you know, something like code that executes across all actions, regardless of where you are. And this is code that executes across all home controller actions, right? And this is only for the index action, and this is only from the about action. So now, if we clean this up, reload the page, we have code that executes across all actions, code that executes across all home controller actions, and hello from the index action. And now we should have code that executes across all actions, all home controller actions, and the about action now, as we see right here. Now, this is, at this point, still a little bit not complete, really, because if we look at the actual rendered markup, you know, it's very nice. We have the Garber Irish thing right here, but we also have the generated Kendo stuff. So we probably want this under the code that executes across all actions, maybe, right? We want to put that as part of this kind of flow of things. The problem with that is that, as we know, you know, this is being generated on the server side. So there's no way we could put it on some plain JavaScript file as we're doing now. So one way to fix that or to get around it is to take this and make it part of our layout. Only the common init, which is the code that executes across all actions, because we want the MVC widgets to be able to put code right inside of here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this. I'm going to put it on the layout right here, because I want to include this thing in there. So just by doing that, I don't want to reset the whole value of it. So this has already been set. So I can simply just do sample app.common equals that. Now, of course, this needs to be part of a script tag. Put the whole thing in there. Oops. Take that out. Take that out. Okay. Clean up the spacing a little bit. Okay, so now we have sampleapp.common equals a object literal, and in there we add the init, which is where the application that executes across all actions works, because we know that we're going to be adding, you know, Kendo widgets and MVC widgets on different parts of the application. And what am I missing here? It's probably good. Okay, so what's going to happen now? Let's take a look at the generated markup. So it's almost there. The only problem is that this is producing its own script tag, which we don't want. And luckily for us, the deferred scripts actually has a Boolean that basically asks if you want the script tag to be generated or not. We can just set this to false because we don't need it. And now, if we look at the code, now we see that there is no script tag added right here. Again, let's put it back in case you didn't see it. Take a look at this section right here. Refresh the page. Now there's a script tag right here that we don't want. So set it to false again, and it should be gone as it is. So now this is the code that's going to be executed across all actions because this is the deferred. So whatever Kendo put in during the path of the generation of the different, the composition of the layout and the correspondent index page, this is what puts it as part of your flow, of your architecture. So we still should have, if we look at the console, we should still have code that executes across all actions, the home controller actions, and the about action. So at this point, we have a very sound architecture that we can build up from. So now it's, you know, it's about, maybe we want to add something like, let's say, let's go to a different page. Oh, the about page is fine. Maybe we want to add something like a grid. So let's go ahead and do that. Find the grid. Let's do a simple case now, just the local data. Copy and paste the code straight from it. Let's take out the button, probably don't need it. Paste that there. Now, of course, as we know, we need it to be deferred. And this is not working because there is no model on the application, on this specific page. So in order to fix that, we need to have some kind of, this is going to be potentially an array of things. So that would imply, if you bear with me for a second, I think that is going to be a product view model right here. So that means that we need the model to be an enumerable of, we don't have the product view model yet. So let's put that somewhere in the application, maybe right here. Oh, stop that. I'm just going to copy paste a simple POCO class, a product view model with 4 properties: the product name, the unit price, the units in stock, and the discontinued. And that implies that this should be an enumerable of product view model. And now we need to pass that enumerable to the about action. And that we can do right here. For now, let's just compile to see that everything is working. And let's just create a mock implementation of this. Range from 0 to 100. Let's just select a fake database for this. And this is going to be a set of product view model. And what do we need? This is going to be a Lambda expression. And we need a product name equals product dot num. We need a unit price. We can make that 10 plus the num. Discontinued. Let's make that a Boolean. So if it's a Boolean, let's do num divided by 2 equals 0. And the units in stock, we can make that again 10 plus num, something like that. And this hopefully should be enough to get us a grid on the page. And that's on the about page. And there it is. And it works. So, and the reason why it works, again, is if we look at the source code that gets generated, the grid puts a lot of markup, right? A lot of HTML stuff in there for the different UI elements that correspond to this table, but no JavaScript at all. And that is because we're using deferred. The actual JavaScript code that pertains to the grid is right here at the bottom of the page in the sampleapp.common.init function. And that's the way that any of the widgets is going to work. And we can do the same, but let's go ahead and add, I don't know, maybe we can add a chart of source. We can put that on maybe the contact page. Yeah, let's take that out. Let's go to the documentation again. And let's go to the chart. And this should be enough. Let's just copy and paste the code. As usual, you're going to copy and paste the code that's here, but it's not going to work with our architecture because it's not using deferred initialization in the sample. So it's as simple as calling that last method, deferred. And by doing that, go back now to contact. We should have that chart there on the page. And if we look at the code, there should be some markup for the chart, as we see right here, very clean, nothing else, only a div for the chart, but then the actual JavaScript very much at the bottom of the page where it belongs. Of course, this will even be applicable to other controllers of your application. At this point, we only have a home controller, but what about, let's say that we have a new controller, right? It is going to be just an empty controller right now. Let's call it the thing controller. Very simplistic controller, but we're going to need some JavaScript to be executed on the index action, potentially, of the thing controller. Do we have an index action? Do we have an index view? We don't. So let's add that. Simple view. All right, and here it is. But what if we want some JavaScript code to execute upon the load of this page? Well, now we have a good architecture. We have the place where the home stuff was happening, but we can just add another one. We can now say that this is going to be the about. It's going to be an object literal. And on the index action, we simply set a function. And now we know that because of the little framework architecture that we're using, about, controller, and index action. Paste that there. Make it run again. We know that per the MVC architecture, to get to that new thing, we just need to go to about, no, not about, thing. The thing controller, it automatically takes us to the index action. And if the architecture is correct, even though the URL doesn't even show that, the actually didn't work. What did I do wrong? Let's go back to the Garber Irish. It wasn't about, it was thing. And there we go. Fix that. And this is the, this is about controller. This is the thing controller. And now it should make sense. Thing controller and index action, as we see it right here. So that is about what I wanted to show. This should give you a nice, clean architecture that you can build up from. You can, if you wanted to, you can probably split this across different files and then add them separately. Maybe you can actually rely on the bundles functionality as well of the MVC framework, as we see that they make use of it here. But in any case, it gives you a way to know where, why, and how your JavaScript is being executed. And the reason that you want to do this is because you probably want to add Ajax interactions. You probably want to add, all kinds of different JavaScript-heavy functionality. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the only way to do it is to have to install, Vue.js into your application and then, re-render that whole framework every time that you load or you go to a different page, or maybe you have to move over to a single page application architecture. That it is a good approach, but it's not something that you need, especially if you already have MVC applications in place. So hopefully that's been helpful. It's the idea is, in fact, that it's not too complex. The idea is to keep it very simple so that you get a good grasp of your JavaScript code. And I believe that this this little trick of passing the controller and action information as part of a data dash attribute on your body tag, and then relying on that to execute the correct functions at the right time is a very good architecture for traditional MVC applications. With that, we probably can take some questions. I'm actually going to run a poll right here just to make sure that this is useful. By the way, I am going to be sharing the code for everything that we saw today. We're going to write a blog post, and the complete source code is going to be up on my GitHub. So yeah, everything that you saw here, you'll have access to. Now I'm going to go and see what questions we have. Okay, somebody was having issues with their sound. Hopefully those were resolved. And then we have a question here: how to deal with JavaScript code that belongs to a control, but that control is in a partial page that gets loaded via Ajax method in a model window, i.e. the control doesn't exist when the page loads. DOM is ready since it's triggered within clicking the detail. That is probably something that we would need to take a look at more closely. If the control is being loaded via Ajax, you need to be careful about how the control is going to be even generated in the first place. When you make an Ajax request, something is going to come back, and that thing that comes back should usually be just plain JSON, and you should probably rely on JavaScript to actually render the actual markup for it. There are some scenarios where you want to get actual HTML, but then that can get a little bit complex, because if you get HTML back, that HTML needs to be turned potentially into maybe a Kendo widget or something like that. So it's something that you need to worry yourself with. The idea of MVC is to keep very simple architectures and to rely on the traditional Ajax mechanisms to get JSON back. That my recommendation is usually when you're doing Ajax things, don't get HTML from the Ajax, get JSON from the Ajax, and then rely on JavaScript. And well, thankfully we have a good architecture on how and where to write the code. Rely on JavaScript to, if you need, produce and make those things that came back a widget, and make those things, you know, populate something else, etc. All right. What else do we have here? Is there a way we can rewatch this video? Because it is poor to follow, we will have a recording for it. In the case the Ajax returns HTML with a control. Yes, exactly, as I was mentioning before. If you get HTML, well then, you know, especially if it's a Telerik control, you know, you're gonna have to figure out if it returns just the HTML markup or also the JavaScript code that needs to be executed with that markup. So at that point, you're getting JavaScript from the server as an Ajax response. In my opinion, that is not something that I would recommend. How much of a performance benefit can be seen by implementing this method? I didn't think the position of the JavaScript on the page really mattered too much. It is going to be performance per network usage. So it is just essentially going to mean that your users see things faster on the screen, even though, you know, JavaScript has not been fully loaded, etc. At least they see something. If you make the JavaScript, you put the scripts at the top, nothing is going to load before all those different network requests are complete. So, you know, it's just good practice to make sure that your JavaScript is at the bottom of the page. You know, how much or how little, it depends on how many files you have. It also depends on how large the files are, etc. All right, perfect. Well, thank you.